Man, we know a lot of the same people, so researching you was a lot of fun. So I gotta hear some old voices and people that have been on the show before, and there are a ton of people who give just a lot of credibility to you, the way you think, the way you approach it.
Thank you.
And where I wanted to start, and this is something I don't have the answer to, so I'm really curious to hear what you say.
All right.
Right now, the noise around being young today is that the world financially has basically come to an end. Everybody's buried under so much debt. There's no way to get ahead. They're stuck. They're trapped. And I've heard that so many times. In the beginning, I just sort of blew it off, and I'm like, it's a mindset problem. It's so pervasive. Is it a mindset problem, or is it really something deeply problematic that's happening?
I think the answer is yes. Yes and yes. I think that there are definitely systemic problems when it comes to things like inequality, when I think it comes to things like student loan debt. Yes, those are problems, and there needs to be a lot of work done on those. And we can simply look at history to see how crazy tax rates are compared to where they've been historically, or how crazy student loan debt is compared to where it was historically. But whenever I hear someone who starts complaining about large-scale societal problems, I just have one question. I say, do you invest in your 401k? And it's one thing to talk about systemic problems, and we should talk about them and tackle them. But the best thing we can do for ourselves is to focus on what we can control. And that's what I believe. That's why I'm here. Some people work on systemic problems. I'm here to help people one-on-one with their money and their psychology.
Yeah, that to me is a very interesting and powerful approach. I come at it the same way. I was giving a talk at Google, and there was an African-American gentleman in the front row, and basically the question was like, is it harder for me? And my answer was, yes, that seems pretty apparent, but now what? So you can go try to tackle that systemic problem, and I'm super glad that there are people who are wired for that.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm always like, what can I do right now today? Because when you're dealing with huge systemic problems, you're doing something amazingly altruistic for the next generation, but the odds of you being able to reap the benefits of that are pretty slim.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that when you can start to take control and make one step after another, for example, for people who are in debt, it's so interesting. When people write me about how to get out of debt, over 90% of them don't know how much they owe. So if you don't know how much you owe, I understand that. Why would you want to open up the emails and the bills? You don't know what's inside, but you know it's bad. But the first step to doing that, to paying it off, is to open it up, confront reality, get real, and then make a plan. And all of those things can be done in and of yourself without regards to what's going on outside your house or outside your email inbox.
One thing that I really like about your approach is the way that you look at it from a psychological standpoint. You talk a lot about programming, the beliefs that people have around money, which I think are really, really important. And as the person who I believe it is my mission in life is to help people construct a frame of reference that sets them up to what I'll call, it's an empowering mindset. It sets them up to be able to actually execute on their dreams.
Yeah.
What is the frame of reference, the mindset, the intentional programming that you think especially young people who are struggling right now should have?
Well, let's start with what they do have. So we grow up with these things I call invisible scripts. And these are the scripts that are beliefs that are so powerful, we don't even realize that they're around us. That's why they're invisible. So a classic one in America is the American dream is buying a house. Where did that come from? And in fact, there's all these phrases that people use like, you're throwing money away on rent. They don't make more land, and on and on and on. If you really deconstruct that and you actually run the numbers, you might discover that actually buying a house is often not the best investment. And this is super counterintuitive. People get really mad because real estate is religion in America. But if you actually dive in deep, you might discover, wow, there's a lot of parties who want me to spend a ton of money. That's why, for example, I could buy today, but I rent. And when people hear that, they're like, wait, I thought I will teach you to be rich, guys, rich, so why is he renting? They get very confused because real estate is religion. Another thing that is really common today for people is there's no way to get ahead, right? Especially for young people. Social Security won't be around, et cetera, et cetera. And I just don't believe in that. I think if you go onto Reddit or you go onto these places where it's a lot of people who are disaffected young people, they create an echo chamber of other people who want to victimize themselves, then you have a choice. Do you want to be reading those threads? Or, like I was reading the comments on your YouTube videos, I was like, these are the best YouTube comments I've ever seen. People are positive, constructive. They're pointing out things they saw in the 32nd minute of the video, meaning they actually watched the whole thing. Those are the kind of people that I want people to be around. So it's not impossible to make money. There's actually a lot of people making money. It's not impossible to get ahead, pay off debt, even invest and grow. There's a lot of people doing it. But if you're surrounded by people who constantly complain about how difficult it is and it's impossible, guess what? You're gonna absorb those invisible scripts.
Dude, that shit really terrifies me. And when I think about, so I'm a child of the 80s, and I was just talking to a good friend of mine who I grew up with, and he was like, oh, I knew you'd be rich one day. And I grew up teetering white collar, blue collar. So like, I was definitely not set up to be wealthy. I didn't know anybody who was wealthy, didn't know anybody who'd been successful. And he was like, oh, I knew you were gonna be rich. And I was like, why? And he said, because you get what you believe in. And he said, you believed money was like a thing, that it was super powerful. He said, you used to talk about it all the fucking time.
Interesting.
And of course, anybody that knows my story knows for decades, I chased money. It was my stated goal. That didn't feel weird to me. I was just like, yeah, I wanna be rich. And I was pursuing that doggedly.
Yeah.
And of course, only end up getting rich once I let go of like understanding that wasn't gonna make me happy. So I set that aside. But because I had all these positive beliefs about that it was possible, that it could happen to anybody, I never thought to not chase it.
Yeah.
And so the company that my partners and I built that ended up being the $1 billion success and just like crazy, we started it in 2009 at like the height of the recession. And so it's like, it just never occurred to me to think that way. And you said something in one of your talks in the book, I can't remember which place, but it was like, even in those moments, people can be successful. But if you're telling yourself that you're not going to be successful, then you don't take the actions.
Yeah.
Walk me through, like, how do you get through to people who have these scripts, they're shutting down, they're not taking those steps? Like, do you have sort of entry-level movements for them?
For sure. Many of us, if you take somebody and you just talk, I do this a lot. They'll be at one of my talks, or they are on my newsletter, or following me on Instagram. And I'll give you an amazing example that just happened recently. I had a woman who wrote me and she said, Ramit, can you help me convince my husband not to waste money? And I go, okay, what's going on? She goes, he spends so much money on iced tea. And I was like, here we go. I go, how much money? And she goes, he buys iced tea 20 times a month, like almost every day. I said, how much is this iced tea? She said, it's $1.50 each time. So in my head, I'm like, this is insane. Like, why are we even talking about this? But I knew there's something here, so I want to unpack it. I said, out of curiosity, what's your household income? No response for 20 minutes, okay? And then finally she comes back, she goes, I'm not comfortable sharing that. I said, just give me a range. Okay, what do you think her and her husband's household income is?
I know the story. I would have guessed otherwise.
You would,
80,000, 100,000.
Like a nice 600,000. And this is a perfect example. Like, rationally and logically, we should literally not be talking about this because it's a rounding error. But there's something going on in her belief system that made her fixate on iced tea. And so for anybody, whether it's iced tea or whether it's, lattes is a classic example. Everybody tells you not to spend money. I'm like, that's the worst advice ever. Buy as many lattes as you want. Or some people, they just love, for example, clothes, right? I like clothes. They love it, but everybody around them has told them things like, that's shallow, that's a waste of money, you should invest in your Roth IRA. And so what do? All of us, we're torn apart because we live in a paradoxical society that is both puritanical, telling us we should retreat into a cave and do nothing, but then we go on Instagram and everyone's in Bora Bora wearing, it's ridiculous. And so what do? We just buy everything and then we feel guilty. It's the worst possible response. So what I do is, first I say, what do you love spending money on? Love. And nobody talks about this. They always say, oh, let me see your budget, you're overspending, and everyone's just like, forget this. Right? I'll never come on here and berate someone for their spending because I've seen it all. When they talk about what they love, then I say, what would it feel like to be able to spend 2 times or 4 times as much on that? People have never thought like that. Then, once we start from a place of aspiration, of what do we want, let's work through the mechanics of how to get there.
Dude, I love that so much. And in your book, you talk about like starting with what you want instead of what you don't want.
Yes.
You also talk about like, what's that money dial? What's the thing like for you that you really get amped up about? And I was like, the funny thing is, I'm doing this research. You have to imagine this. I'm doing this research in a room that I like don't usually let people go into.
Okay.
and it's known as the comic room.
Okay.
And if you go in the comic book room, you will see there. It's just like stacked of like comics everywhere.
Okay.
And that's my iced tea. Like if my wife were going to complain about what does Tom spend his money on outside of the business, of course, it's that. Like
now, why do you love those comic books?
Well, that's a very involved story. But I will say that there's something unique about comic books that give you these really big ideas very rapidly.
Okay. Love it. And then let me share this story that just happened a couple days ago here in LA. I was giving a talk and I asked somebody what they love spending on, and she said clothes. She said she loves buying clothes. I said great, and she was so excited. I love just whenever you ask people, their eyes light up. And I asked her what would it look like if you quadrupled your spending, and she said I would have clothes everywhere, like all day long. I'd be ordering online. I'd be sending half of them back. And I said, where do you shop? And she said, Topshop. And I said, okay, so you quadrupled your spending. Where would you shop? She said, Topshop. I just have a lot more. And it was fascinating because when you ask people what they love spending on and what if they could spend more, what would they do? Most people have never thought about it. She had limited herself into the box of Topshop. Now, I don't know, Topshop's perfectly fine, that's fine. But I guarantee you, if you quadrupled or 10x your spending on the thing you love, your money dial, you might shop at a different brand. You might even fly to the factory that makes them and get a behind-the-scenes tour, as I did when we went on our honeymoon. So why I'm sharing this is that so many of us operate in a linear way. Oh, if I have this thing I like coffee, I might get 2 coffees a day. But what if you actually truly love it? You might go to the coffee factory and bring your family with you. So there's this whole idea of what you can do with a rich life, and it doesn't just mean more stuff. It could be experiences. It could be security, like buying a house in a place that keeps you safe, or staying at a hotel where you're around things that are comfortable for you. There's so many different ways to look at a rich life, and most people, I want to challenge them to really think what it would feel like to spend more on the thing they love. Of course, if they cut costs mercilessly on the things they don't.
Yeah, really fast define a rich life for people, because I think that's going to be a key component to this whole discussion.
Well, it's different for everyone. My rich life early on was to be able to go to a restaurant and order appetizers, because I never did it when I was a kid.
Get it.
Like ever. We would go and we'd eat out once every 4 to 6 weeks if we had a coupon, and we would like share 2 Cokes with the whole family, and we would never order appetizers. So I was like, I'm gonna do it. And then the next dream for me was to be able to hop in a taxi if I lived in New York during the summer without having to take the train and sweat before a meeting. Now my dreams got bigger. And there's a variety of things that are my rich life, but everybody's is different. So some people, I have people in my book, they're like, I use your book, my wife and I retired at 35 and 36, we drive around in an RV. I don't want to drive around in an RV. But he and his wife do, and I love that. So a rich life is what you define. And when I ask people what's a rich life to you, they usually say 2 things. Freedom, which is a very nice word, but it's kind of generic. And they say a number, usually $1 million. And I say, like, freedom, what is that to you? And they're like, I want to do whatever I want when I want. And I'm like, get specific. Do you want to order appetizers? Do you want to do yoga at 3 p.m.? And that's where the conversation stops. So if you're watching, I want everyone to think, what is your rich life? And take it from the clouds to the street. I want to buy 3 different Lululemon tank tops a month because I don't ever want to have to wear an old one. Whatever. Go as crazy as you want. I want to travel for a month and I want to bring my family with me. Great. A rich life is different for everyone, but is about your definition.
Yeah, it's interesting, and be careful what you aim for. So we just did a piece of content not too long ago, and I was standing out in the backyard, and the guy that does my Instagram was like, hey, talk to people about like what you used to do when you were broke to like stay motivated. And I was like, well, we used to drive around these really rich neighborhoods, Beverly Hills, Bel Air, all of that. And I said, ironically, I'm recording this, telling you this from one of the houses that we used to drive by. And be careful what you aim for, because you really might get it. And it's like that whole Topshop example that you were talking about, where the person who put themselves in that box, they had a lack of thought about anything beyond it. And
Totally.
It's that lack of thought that can work for you or against you. And what I mean by that is, I didn't even think about, an economic downturn means that I can't do well. I was just sort of oblivious to that in 2009 when we were starting Quest. And so I just marched ahead assuming that it could happen. Or you you are thinking about it and you paint a very clear vision. And so you're constantly asking yourself, I'm not going to get there where I'm at now. Yeah. So how do I cross this chasm? How do people cross that chasm? Like, I know right now the one thing that people are thinking is, fuck, these guys are just like off in the clouds. It's two rich guys having a rich guy conversation. It's not real. But dude, inside I'm thinking, motherfucker, I used to be so poor that I couldn't pay my bills. Yeah. I used to sleep on an air mattress with a fucking leak in it, dude. And so I would blow it up, sit on the floor every night, sometimes like 3 a.m. I'm so fucking exhausted. And usually I would only do it halfway, so I was fucking tired. I put clothes under my air mattress. Yeah. By the way, also sleeping halfway in the closet because I had a roommate. Wow. And so I couldn't even like have my air mattress in the normal part of the room. I emptied my closet, I fucking slid my bed half in, so when it deflated, you know the rack, that like the door slides across, I would wake up with that shit on my back. I'm like, that's where I fucking started. This was not like somebody handed me money, but in that place, I had this obsessive belief that I could make it come true. Yeah. That I could make